And then while we're still in a meditative mode, we'll shift our focus from the breath now and take just a few minutes to cultivate our intention, our motivation, particularly motivations, right, of love, compassion, and bodhicitta. And remember, for those, we start with equanimity. We can remember like that all sentient beings are exactly the same in terms of wanting happiness, in terms of not wanting suffering. And for ordinary sentient beings, although we want happiness, we and don't want suffering, we are all similar in actually creating the causes, oftentimes creating causes for suffering and going away from the causes of happiness. Like our friends and loved ones want happiness and don't want suffering. All the billions of strangers to us want happiness and don't want suffering. Those people we don't like also want happiness and don't want suffering. Since everyone's the same in that way, what's reasonable, right, is to spend my life, spend my time working for the happiness and well-being of the most sentient beings, not only for myself. So I'm just one. Others are infinite, limitless. Also, if I check, then, just only focusing on my own well-being and happiness is actually the cause of all the problems. Whether I look at my own life or just life on this planet, when people only focus on their own well-being, we actually cause so much suffering to others and also to ourselves. Like all the problems in families, all the problems in like neighborhoods, in towns, cities, in nations, even the global problems, right, come from selfishness, self-centeredness. And from self-centeredness comes all the other afflictive emotions like greed, hatred, pride, and arrogance, all kinds of terrible decisions come from that mind of self-centeredness. All the wars come from self-centered mind. All the problems with the environment come from people having self-centered mind. All the problems, like whether it be in our own town, or in our nation, they come from the self-centered mind. And then all the problems in my own life, right, come from the self-centered mind. All the negative karma I create is grounded in the self-centered mind. So you develop like this feeling then that like that self-centered mind is just a cause of misery, right, to be like thrown away. Whereas all good things come from love, kindness, a sense of our interconnectedness, sense of compassion, a loving, open heart, right? So like just, immediately, right? Like best moments in people's lives are moments of open-hearted love. The thing that gives life meaning is love, kindness, compassion. The root of good karma, right, is love, kindness, and compassion. All the qualities of the spiritual path come from love and compassion. Buddhahood itself, right, even comes from love and compassion. So if I want to be happy in this life, even just in the moment, if I want to be happy at the time of my death, if I want to have good future lives, if I want to achieve the qualities of the stages and paths, or if I want to achieve enlightenment, for all of those things, like love and compassion are the most important. I decide, right? So I dedicate myself to love, to compassion. I dedicate my whole being to love and compassion. To accomplish like the welfare of others and even also of myself. Like I direct my mind, my being to compassion. Others are so precious. In past lives, they were my parents, my relatives, my loved ones. In the present life, all my happiness and well-being comes in dependence upon others. Like all my future happiness in terms of in samsara comes from the kindness of others. Buddhahood itself is totally dependent on others. So I totally dedicate myself to bodhicitta. The only way to fully accomplish the welfare of others is to myself attain enlightenment. So for that purpose, right, for the purpose of achieving the welfare of others, I'll strive for enlightenment. That's my reason for studying the Prajnaparamita, which is the main path to Buddhahood. And it's also just the reason for all things of my life. And so with that in mind, then we can recite the verse of refuge in bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Everybody. So, grab a copy of the Sutra. So really we're up to, I'll just kind of remind us where we're up to in the Sutra itself. We've gotten through like what's called, sometimes called, right, the general the title, we covered that, and then the general prologue, which is like, and they call it general, right? The general prologue is like, thus did I hear at one time, and so on, like, which is common to many sutras, right? So it's a general prologue in the sense that it's giving us the setting, and then we had the specific prologue to the Heart Sutra, which is unique, right? Which is that it was on Massive Ultra's Mountain, and the Buddha was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. And then through the power of the Buddha, right? Avalokiteshvara was empowered, through the, like, inspiration, you could call it, through the inspiration or the blessings of the Buddha. Avalokiteshvara was empowered to understand this topic fully, in order to answer the questions presented. And then Shariputra was inspired to ask Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how any son or daughter of the lineage would train in order to practice the profound perfection of wisdom. And then now we're going to start, last time we just very little bit began, but now we're going to go into more detail about Avalokiteshvara's answer. And what we're going to start with is, like I said last time, we went over the structure of the sutra. And so today I want to focus kind of on the very first paragraph of his answer is what they sometimes, in many of the commentaries, they call it a brief summary answer. And then the rest is like a detailed answer. And I said that last time. So this paragraph is the brief summary answer. And in it, it says, he, meaning, he said that he said that, right, meaning Shariputra said that question. And the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. And so that's like a summary of his answer, and then we'll go into later in the text, we'll go into the details. So I'll start looking at that paragraph just by saying a few things briefly from, we've been also following along in the Tendar Larampa's commentary. And so I'm just going to look at that for a moment, and then we're going to go into, then we're going to kind of just talk. But one point that Tendar Larampa points out, and so I just thought to address it, is you'll see, like I just said in that paragraph, he says, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Right? So this word also, the commentators say, why does he include also? Right? Why does he say also there? And so Tendar Larampa gives the kind of common answer, which is, he says, the word also in those five aggregates also indicates that not only is I empty of inherent existence, but mine is also empty of inherent existence. Thus, it indicates the stages of understanding the two selflessnesses of persons and phenomena. So I wanted to say something about that. So there's that word also there, right? And what he's getting at is that when it says the five aggregates also empty of inherent existence, right? So there are two ways to interpret what he's saying, is what Tendar Larampa is pointing out. And these are both meditations, actually. They're both meditation practices that we're going to kind of discuss. But so one of them is like that the I, the sense of personal self, right? That the five aggregates are empty of a self. That makes sense, empty of an inherently existent or truly existent person, self, me, And then the other meaning, what he says, mine, right? Actually, so it's interesting. In this context, there were like I and mine. We often talk about that in terms of emptiness. And the mine, that word mine, like ownership, can have two different connotations. And actually, they're there in English. So I'll just mention that, right? One is sometimes we say mine in the context of things we own, right? Like you could say that's my car, or that's my house, or that's my book, or that's my computer, or whatever. So that's one way of, we use mine sometimes that way. And then there's another way in which mine is used, which is not so much ownership as, like we say, my hand, right? Or my eyes. Like I said, you said, I'm going to go get my eyes checked at the doctor, right? Or, I'm going to have, I'm having a pain in my leg or my back or something, right? So there, it's not so much that you own that thing, but that it's what's the word, part of your being, I guess, right? Or you could even say like my mind, like how you might say that like, oh, you might say like, oh, my mind is not so clear today, right? Like, or my memory is not so good, right? So it's not just your body, but sometimes we use that mind in relation to like aspects of our being. And in this context, mind has both of those connotations. Does that make sense? So it's commonly used in English. We talk that way. And mind here would have that meaning. But the primary one are the parts. So mind in the sense of things you own, but also mind in the sense of parts of my being. And so here, the first connotation of the five aggregates are empty is that they're empty of a self, right? A person that's inherently existent. And the second meaning would be that the aggregates themselves, right, which make up your being, are also empty. So that's the also, right, that the aggregates are empty of an I, or personally, inherently existent person, or I, self. The second is that the aggregates themselves, right, are empty. And we'll get into what that means, but that's what Tendar Larampa is saying. And then I'll just read I'll read a little bit more of Tendar Larampa for a moment. Right, so he says that mind. Then he says, thus it indicates it's the stages of understanding of the two selflessnesses of persons and phenomena. Right, so we say that there are two types of selflessness, right, and they're this or emptiness, and one is the selflessness of persons, the other is the selflessness of phenomena. Right, mine would be phenomena, and some tenet systems, some Buddhist philosophers, some Buddhist philosophical systems say that the selflessness of persons is like grosser or less subtle, and the selflessness of phenomena is more subtle. But in the Prasangika Madhyamaka system, we say that they're the same level of subtlety. So like in the system of Chandrakirti and Nagarjuna, we say that they're not, one is not more subtle than the other. And then Tendar Larampa says, quote, empty of inherent existence means empty from its own side. Right, so that's the way Tendar Larampa is saying. Empty of inherent existence means empty from its own side. We're going to try to look at what does that mean, from its own side. Therefore, and he says here, therefore it means that phenomena are not established objectively or from the side of the object. For example, when a house appears in a dream, it does not appear from the side of the basis appearing towards the subject, but rather is projected out from the side of the perceiving consciousness. Therefore, it must be understood that the conventional status of phenomena is just like that. According to the Prasangikas, inherent establishment is the object of negation, of reasonings analyzing the ultimate. Hence, although the qualification ultimate is not affixed explicitly to the object of negation, it is affixed implicitly. Therefore, it is of definitive meaning and is literal, meaning that this sutra has definite meaning and is literally true. So, today we're going to kind of unpack what does Tendar Larampa mean by those various things. But I just want to, before we go any further, over the course of today, we'll unpack his various levels of meaning, but I just want to say a couple quick thoughts about them before we get into the five aggregates. Right, he's saying not established from its own side. He gives us an example, right, of a house in a dream, which is an interesting example, isn't it? Because when you're dreaming, if you're dreaming of a house, the house seems to exist out there. When you're in the dream, it totally does, doesn't it? It seems like, it's there, right? From its own side. But when you wake up, of course, was that house literally there from its own side? No, right? As he says, it was projected by the mind, right? It was projected by the dreamer's mind. And we all have that experience, don't we? Like, if you have a dream of something and then you wake up, when you're in the dream, it seems like it's really there. And then when you wake up, oh, it wasn't really there, right? That's not an experience of emptiness, but it's a good metaphor or a good example through which to understand emptiness. Because with emptiness, when we talk about emptiness, things seem to exist inherently from their own side, and then what he says is that that's the object of negation. That things don't, which means things don't really exist in the way they appear. Anyway, so we'll get into that. But what I said last week we would do first, which I think is important, is right. So Avalokiteshvara in this paragraph we're discussing said, those five aggregates also are empty of inherent existence. And what I was saying last week was it occurred to me as I was sort of preparing, while preparing to kind of get into this section, that, first of all, like, I don't know how, that we need to know what are the five aggregates, don't we? In other words, if we're going to analyze the five aggregates to understand their emptiness, we need to know what are the five aggregates, don't we? And some of you may know that very, very well, and some may know it a little bit, but I just thought to at least go over them a little, not in great detail. And part of that is that, like, when you're studying, for someone, like for the students of the Prajna Paramita, it's kind of assumed that they know the five aggregates and some of the other things listed here. The Buddha would have, when the Buddha was teaching, his audience, right, were monks and, great arhats and great bodhisattvas who would have known that. And, in the monasteries, when you study this, you would have already studied the Abhidharma, where those things are taught. So anyway, so we should cover that a little bit. So I want to just talk a little bit about the five aggregates. And one point is, so something, like in Sanskrit, it's skandhas, right? They say skandha, the five skandhas. And you've probably heard that term. Maybe if you're around Buddhist enough, you hear the word skandha, the five skandhas. And usually they're translated, skandha is translated as aggregate. Some translators, like Art Engel is one, translated as heap, right? A heap or an aggregate, a pile, kind of a bunch. You could say that's what an aggregate is, right? And it's interesting in his translation, in Art Engel's translation of Vasubandhu, it's called The Inner Science of Buddhist Practice, which is a translation of Vasubandhu's summary of the five heaps with a commentary by Srimati. Actually, I'll get the exact quote. I thought it was interesting because we're going to use this later anyway to relate to the teachings on emptiness. Page 247 in that text. It is, yeah. He says something interesting. I'm not even getting into the details of what are the five aggregates yet, because we're talking about what is the word aggregate. And it's interesting. This is Vasubandhu, right? And so Vasubandhu is one of the great, probably the most famous author of texts in the Mahayana. And he wrote Hinayana texts too, but on Abhidharma. And he was the brother of a Sangha. I talked a little bit about him. But anyway, he says something interesting here. He's talking about skandha. He says, a skandha it's a compound, essentially, right? It's a heap, it's a collection, right? And then he says, because a heap is not a real substance, the term skandha is synonymous with an ordinary heap. Therefore, the five skandhas are only nominally existent, like a heap of grain. Therefore, the expression skandha, or form skandha, anyway, so I'll just stop there. He goes on, but he's making an interesting point, isn't he? Which is like, if you say there's a collection of things, right? Then the term, like, that idea of a collection, right? Like a collection of grain, he gives that example. In what way is it a collection, right? Or a heap, or a aggregate of things, right? And it means it's a collection conceptually, right? In other words, those, if you put those pieces of grain together, right, into a pile, and then you say, well, now I have a collection of grain, right? But those bits of grain are not, from their own side, intrinsically collected or intrinsically related, right? They're not intrinsically one thing. We conceptually label them as a collection, right? And there's a similar point in Shanti Deva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. He makes a point like that. He says, if a leader of a country gathers together a group of people and gives them weapons, right, and sort of trains them, then we say, oh, they're an army, right? But if you search, right, no one of those people is army, right? They're a human being, right? But if you collect them and sort of put them together in a certain way, and then you label them army, they function as an army. But actually, if you search each person, no person is an army. So an army exists and functions. How does it function? Conceptually, right? In the same way, like a heap of grain, right? The heap of grain can function as a heap of grain, but if you search each piece of that grain, it's not a heap, right? And so what art is getting at there, or what Vasubandhu is getting at there rather, is that even this idea of a collection or a heap or a skanda or an aggregate of things, we conceptually sort of, what's the word? Lump them together, right? And then they function together, but they're not intrinsically or inherently a group, because no group is inherently a group, right? Actually, I'm just pausing to think, it's a very profound point he's getting at, because think about yourself in relation to your child. I'm just going off on a tangent here for a second, but think about yourself in relation to your own family of origin in childhood, right? As kids, we feel our family is inherently a group, right? You totally feel that, it's whether it's good or bad, you feel this is my family, right? And it seems like it's intrinsically connected, right? But then, of course, eventually people go off to other parts of the country, and people die, and people change, right? And then how much do people suffer when they think, oh my goodness, I was so close to so-and-so before, and now it feels like I barely know them. They've changed so much, right? It's that you felt, it's that, reality is not, that person was never intrinsically who part of your group that you conceptualized, right? And then as they sort of live their life, sometimes it can actually bother you, right? That they seem to be changing. But actually they were only, it's because you held to this idea that aggregate was somehow inherently, and from its own side, that aggregate, it never was it was an aggregate, but only conceptually. Does that make sense? It only existed as a group in a conceptual sense. It was never inherently a group. Anyway, that's that. But now, so each of the aggregates are each a group, if in a sense. Does that make sense? Like we say the 5 aggregates. And in a way, those 5 aggregates also are aggregated. Does that make sense? So each one is an aggregate, meaning a collection. And then those 5 collections also collect. And why are these important, right? It's because, first of all, each one is a collection, right? Like the body is a collection of parts and so on. And then it's like you have 5 heaps, right? 5 piles, 5 groups of things. And when you pile those 5 piles together, that's the basis upon which we think about our self as a being. So that's the way the Buddha taught this. And as a kind of basis upon which we think about and relate to persons, ourselves and other persons. Okay, so now, and the Buddha taught the 5 aggregates in sutras. And then all Buddhist traditions after the Buddha teach them. So the first of the 5 aggregates is the form aggregate, right? And you'll see, in the sutra, right? These are all listed. It says form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other, and so on. And it says feeling, discrimination, composition, and consciousness. So it lists them. But so what is the form aggregate? And there are different definitions in different texts. But well, first I'll just say, to put it simply, you could say the form aggregate is your body, and then also that's the most important part of it for any given being, and then it also includes your senses, right? Your body includes your sense powers, your senses, sense organs. Let's say that way, your sense organs, and the objects of those. So it also includes external objects, sounds, sights, tastes, tactile, and so on, of the 5 senses. So the eye organ and the eye faculty, and then visual objects that you can see and so on. The ear organ and the ear faculty, and then audible sounds and so Sometimes they also say it's things made up of the four elements, like so things made up of atoms. You could say it that way. So in brief, though, right? So the form aggregate is matter. Then it's things made of matter, and so for us, right? That would include your organs, right, of your body. It would include your senses. It would include your ears, your eyes, your nose, your tongue, and so on. And just pause there. You can see how that's a heap, right? It's a aggregate. It's a bunch of things, right? Anyway, maybe that's enough. Because otherwise we're getting into the emptiness of it. So we'll just leave it at that. So that in a brief way, that's the form aggregate. Right? It's your body and the objects of your senses, and your senses themselves, which are part of your body. The second of the five aggregates is feeling, which in Sanskrit is Vedana. And this one I wanted to tell you a little bit about, because I think people sometimes get the wrong idea. The word feeling in English, I think, it can be deceptive a little bit if we don't know the formal definition. Because sometimes, if we say, how are you feeling today, right? That's not what this is getting at. Here, what they're getting at is feeling in Buddhist psychology, psychology, I guess I'll call it. This one is in Buddhist psychology, actually, there are certain, there's a teaching on mind and mental factors. Mind is the main mind, and then there are various mental factors that go along with the main mind. And there are certain mental factors that, according to Buddhist psychology, are what they call omnipresent. They're always there. And one of them is feeling. There are, how many are there? 1, 2, 3. I think there are 5 omnipresent mental factors, 5 things that are always there with the main mind. So one of them is feeling. And what feeling in the Buddhist context means is that in any given moment, mind is perceiving something, consciousness, awareness is perceiving something. And then there's always this factor of feeling present, which means that our mind always, that the feeling factor is that it experiences the object as pleasant. It's very fundamental, it's very simple. So at a very simple level, as the mind apprehends that object, it experiences it as either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So it's a pleasurable feeling, an unpleasurable, or I'll call it just that, unpleasurable feeling, or a neutral feeling, right? And according to Buddhism, according to Buddhism, that's always there. First of all, even in your dreams, when you're awake, and so on. And then there's always one of those, and of course it changes. And whether you experience something as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral is caused ultimately by karma. Right? So positive karma leads to a pleasant feeling. Negative karma leads to an unpleasant feeling, and neutral karma leads to a neutral feeling. I want to pause for a second, because I think this is important, is that why, we're going to get into this as we go through these different aspects of our being. Because first of all, the 5 skandhas are supposed to be, what's the word? They include everything, right? They're all conditioned phenomena, they say. All conditioned phenomena are included in the 5 skandhas. And so the Buddha could have categorized your being, our being, sentient beings, sort of what makes up a sentient being, in many different ways. So why did he include feeling, particularly, right, as one of the list? And one point I want to point out here is that the Buddha emphasized in this, the Buddha could have categorized, you could categorize the same thing in many different ways, can you? That's true of anything, right? We can make up our categories to look at something in different ways. And what the Buddha was getting at in his categorization was that he was emphasizing the things, the 5 aggregates actually are samsara. They are like that which suffers. They're caused by, and so anyway, so the point I'm getting at though is this, is that for us, right, there are many different mental factors. There are, long list of mental factors. But what the Buddha was pointing out, I think, and what other people have said, not just me, but is that feeling is a very important mental factor. Why? Right? First of all, it's a result of karma. Right? So actually, if you understand feeling, it helps you understand karma. But also, and this is the emphasis, it's based upon our feelings of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, those kinds of feelings, that we give rise to all sorts of mental afflictions in samsara, right? In other words, because what happens? When you have a pleasant feeling, right? Then you give rise, ordinary samsaric beings give rise to attachment. When you have an unpleasant feeling, ordinary samsaric beings give rise to aversion and then anger and hatred, right? And when you have a neutral feeling, you tend to give rise to indifference and ignorance. And so these three types of feelings are very much connected to our process of how we stay engaged in samsara and how we give rise to our afflictive emotions, our afflicted minds. So that's in large part why the Buddha emphasized feeling. Okay. Then the third of the five aggregates is, they sometimes call it either discrimination or discernment. You can call it either one. It's another omnipresent mental factor. So in other words, it's another factor that's always there. And the definition technically of this one is it's the experience of apprehending the marks or signs of a thing that distinguishes the unique features of that thing. And so what they're getting at there is sometimes they use very simple examples, like if you open your eyes and look and you go, oh, that's blue, immediately there's a recognition or discernment of blue, and blue is different than red, right? So any sort of when they say the marks or the signs, they mean like the unique things about that, what distinguishes it. Let's put it that way. And so there are countless kinds of discrimination that we have, right? Like, and again, in this sense, or discernment, and so they give examples like seeing, if you see somebody in the distance, then you think, oh, person, right? It's not a tree, that's discernment, right? Then if you're closer, you think, oh, it's a male or a female or whatever, or a child or an adult that's all discernment, right? It's like distinguishing that thing. I just looked over it as a book, that's discernment, right? Seeing that the book is different than the table. And so they sometimes say it apprehends the uncommon sign of that object. So it sort of discerns what is the object in a very basic way. And again, we're doing that all the time, right? The mind is always, discriminating or discerning or, and again, I'll just point out this is very much connected. You'll notice if you contemplate, and I want to say a couple. So one point is this is again very much connected to our afflictive emotions, isn't it? In other words, if you look at your own process, then right, like so, for example, desire. Right? Actually, desire you have to discern, right? I want this, and I want that, and it's always connected to that. Anger is always connected to discernment, right? Or to discrimination, you call it. Pride, right? I'm better than you. I'm worse than you. I'm important. Whatever. All the afflictive emotions are grounded in discernment. And I want to suggest something. I want to actually ask you guys a question. Maybe relates to this. Like, many of you have heard of the five aggregates many times, right? Like, if you study Buddhism a little bit, you've heard the five aggregates. But actually, my question is like, have you contemplated them in relation to your own experience? Like, have you sat, like when you sit to meditate, right? You can focus on the breath or whatever, right? But then actually part of meditation, if you're going to study this Heart Sutra, right? Or Abhidharma, is actually to watch your own mind and go, oh, that's feeling, right? And I have good news is that feeling's always there. So it's not like you have to go looking too far to find it. It's always there with you. Discernment is always there with you, right? And if you watch your mind, it's like, wow, it's always doing that, right? Even the breath, that's the in-breath. That's the out-breath. Oh, I'm thinking, right? What am I thinking? Oh, wait, I should come back to the breath. Oh, that's the breath, right? That's discernment. Discernment is continuous, actually. It's every moment, right? You're discerning. You know, and then like, are my eyes fully open or are they closed, right? Then you discern. I guess like it's, and again with the feeling, right? It's like it might be, if it's a neutral feeling, you often don't even notice it, right? But it's always there, right? And if you track it, it would be like, oh, I'm feeling neutral. I'm feeling neutral, right? And then if you start to have an unpleasant feeling, like your knee hurts, right? And then watch what happens, right? Like you'll give rise to some kind of agitation, right? Oh, my knee's hurting. Oh, that's not good. Oh, I'm upset, my knee hurts. You know, and I guess my point is like, these are for contemplation, right? These are to notice in your own experience, because actually in a way, you know, oh, anyway. Again, I'm trying not to get into emptiness yet. So I'll just say these make up your experience, right? These make up your being. These are the basis upon which you label yourself and think of yourself. So, you know, and probably if you've studied the five, my guess is if you've studied and heard the five aggregates before, you've probably thought a little bit about the body. But many people don't then go beyond that to think about, but the Buddha was suggesting, obviously, to think about feeling as pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And if you do that and you start to watch, you'll realize like, oh, wow, this person said something I didn't like, right? Like actually, if you think, I'll give you, or actually right now, it'd be like these days, if it's probably in relation to either, like all of everybody, if you're, actually, if you're on this, if you're on this planet, and it would be also in relation to, like, the easy one is in relation to coronavirus. If you're a human being on this planet, if you're in this country, then it could be in relation to politics and race and all that, right? But like, if you want, like, I mean, you know, if you turn on any social media or TV or news thing, right? And instead of paying it, if you don't pay it, I mean, you're actually, you'll watch, if you watch the process, right, you'll be discerning. Oh, actually, and your mind will try to do it. Even like if you see a politician who you don't know, right? Your mind will be going, that's a person. They're wearing, if it's a guy, he's wearing a suit. Is he a Republican or a Democrat, right? And your mind will start this process of discernment, right? And then you'll feel pleasant and unpleasant feelings, right? And then watch how quickly they give rise to anger, right? And my point is, that's your experience all the time. You know, whether it's in relation to coronavirus or politics or your lunch or your dinner or your children or your spouse or your friend, we're always doing these things, right? Feeling and discernment. And actually, you know, when your spouse, for example, if you have that or whatever, whoever the person, your friend or something, if they give rise to a pleasant feeling, then you like them. Right? When they give rise to an unpleasant feeling, then you're annoyed by them. Right? You don't like them, even though it's the same person. Right? And my point is that these are always there, and if you watch them, you'll see how they give rise to your mental affliction, how your mental afflictions arise in dependence upon these. Let's put it that way. And that's part of what the Buddha was talking about, is based on feeling and discrimination, we give rise to all kinds of mental afflictions, and these are part of our being as a samsaric being. And if you contemplate them, you start to see, oh, my aggregates, my mind is samsara. It's not samsara. Then you start to understand it experientially. Samsara is not some place out there. It's not this planet. It's not your neighborhood. It's your own body and mind are samsara. They're produced by karma and mental afflictions. And every instant you're giving rise to karma and mental afflictions, actually. Anyway, so that's...
Warren, do you mind if I ask a question, please?
Sure, go ahead.
This is Sarah.
Okay.
So as you've been talking, I've been trying to, and I don't really know how to phrase this well or correctly, but, you know, if you break down feeling into pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, isn't that in itself kind of a form of discrimination, because you have to be able to then discriminate if something to you is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? So in what way are they kind of separated, or in what way is feeling maybe like a separate thing than just kind of a subset of discrimination? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Actually, it's a good question. So if you think, I'll try to answer it and then tell me if it fully answers your question. So in Buddhist psychology, that's why I was saying, you know, like there's the main, what they talk about is sometimes like there's the main mind or awareness, and then these are, I call mental factors. So the mental factors accompany the main mind. They sometimes in traditional Buddhist texts, they sometimes use this example of like if the main mind is like a king or a queen, and then the mental factors are the retinue that are around them. And so my point is this, is like, so in any given instant, let's say you see, a simple example, like, I don't want to give, like, so I'm going to give a simple example like I just thought of the example of my niece when she sees an ice cream cone. She likes ice cream. So when, like, if she walks in the room and sees somebody holding an ice cream cone, right? I'm just using that example. There's the main awareness is aware of a visual perception of ice cream. And these things all happen simultaneously. So in other words, the discrimination would be in relation to that visual consciousness. She's seeing, she recognizes that it is ice cream. And then for her, there would be an immediate pleasant feeling. And those happen simultaneously. So one is, the role of discrimination is recognizing ice cream. And then along with that and simultaneous with it is this experience of a pleasant feeling because she likes ice cream. And my point is like, at that point, she's not, whereas the discrimination is in relation to the object of that consciousness, in that case, the ice cream cone. If she were then to say, if I were to then say to her, oh, you always have a pleasant feeling when you look at ice cream, then, and she had looked at her own mind, then her object of mind would be her own pleasant feeling, and she would be discriminating. Oh, you're right. I feel happy when I see ice cream. Then the happiness, then the feeling would become an object of discrimination. But in this sense, it's all there. I guess what I'm getting at is that all the mental factors are arising in relation to whatever that consciousness, the main consciousness, is apprehending. So if the main consciousness is apprehending in a given instant, because these all happen in each instant. So if in one instant, the main consciousness is apprehending a visual image of, whatever, a certain shape, the discrimination actually is, oh, that shape is ice cream. The feeling would be, in her case, a pleasant feeling. Then like she might also give rise to other mental factors like desire. I want that ice cream. I'm sure she would. And mental engagement. She would pay attention to that ice cream, and everything else would fall away for her. She would only focus on that, and so on. So there are many mental factors that arise in an instant or in a moment in relation to a main object of awareness. But so in the sense that in this context, then the feelings would arise in relation to that object, and discernment wouldn't be discerning specifically. The discernment wouldn't be in relation to the feeling, because that's not what the main consciousness is focused on at that time. The main consciousness is just focused on the ice cream. But you're right in the sense that if you turn your awareness inward and start looking at your own feelings, then you can discriminate, one feeling from another. But discrimination is always in relation to whatever the main awareness is focused on, and feeling is always in relation to whatever. It's accompanying the mind and is arising in relation to the main object of that awareness in that moment. Does that answer your question though?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so now we've covered the first three. Any other questions about those first three before I go on?
Yes, Lauren?
Yeah.
What do you mean by simultaneous in that context?
According to like the Abhidharma, at least my understanding of it, like they really are. Each one is momentary, and like that in each moment, it's like that awareness is in a moment. So each moment of awareness, I'll call it, is in a moment, and each of those moments is accompanied by feeling, by discernment, by other mental factors like mental engagement or discrimination and so on. So it really means in the same moment. or arising simultaneous to that moment of awareness. And in the next moment, in the next moment, so for example, so in one moment of awareness of the ice cream, it would be that. Then if the ice cream tipped over and fell on the floor, and that moment, as it was falling, there would be a moment of displeasure, even while it was still in the air or something. So it means arising with that main awareness and in that same moment of awareness.
It would seem it has to be sequential, though.
Say why?
I can't. That's my reaction to that, is that one has to occur before the other. So, but I can't say how or why.
I'm thinking that same too. That discrimination would happen first, and then how you're feeling about that negative, neutral, or positive. I'm confused about the simultaneous.
Yeah, and before that would be awareness. So there's awareness, then there's discrimination, then there's the feeling about the discrimination. They would seem to need to follow one another, not be simultaneous.
Could it be that maybe we're only aware of them sequentially, but that they're happening simultaneously?
Why can't things happen simultaneously? For instance, you see an object, you see its color, you see its shape, and any other factors. Why can't those all be seeing them in the same moment?
I can see the factors being, you can be aware of the factors simultaneously. That I have no problem with. It's the other components. It's the discrimination and the feeling that follow are based on that awareness. So to be based on it, this is maybe useless, but to be based on it, it seems to have to follow it.
And you have a feeling without discrimination.
I'll share Lottie. I pulled out. I just want to share Lottie Rinpoche's. This is he was a great, great teacher. I'll share what he says about this topic, because he was, he was giving a traditional and he's a great learned scholar. So he was teaching Buddhist psychology. So this is the way he explains this point. And so he says, so first of all, he was getting at what I was raising earlier, that there's, he says there's a twofold division, which is the main mind, which is like the awareness itself, right? Which we're going to get to. That's consciousness, actually. That's the aggregate of consciousness. The main mind is what he's calling it here. And then there's mental factors. That's what I was calling them, right? Mental factors are things that accompany the main mind. And he says, this twofold division is a way of describing the various functions of consciousness. Mind here is synonymous with the main mind, and is that which knows the mere entity of the object being apprehended. Minds are accompanied by mental factors which apprehend various features of that object, affecting the manner in which the mind apprehends its object and so forth. Minds and mental factors with respect to any particular object have 5, he calls them similarities. So, and I'll read what they are. So he's saying they accompany it. And he says, let me just move these out of the way. So I'll read the 5, and they're interesting because it gets it. I mean, he's raising some of the questions Jeff is asking about. So I'll read all 5, and then you guys can respond and see what you think. So I'll read them. 1. Now, these are the 5 things that are true of mind in relation to mental factors. 1, they are produced in dependence upon the same basis. And thus, if the I sense power is the uncommon empowering condition of the main mind, it is also the unpowering common condition of those accompanying mental factors. The main mind and the mental factors observe the same object. In my example, the ice cream. Number 3, they are generated in the same aspect, and that if the I consciousness is generated in the aspect of blue, the accompanying mental factors are also generated in the aspect of blue. 4, they occur at the same time, in that when one is produced, the other is also produced. And 5, they have the same substantial entity, in that the production, abiding, and cessation of the two occur simultaneously. So, so that's the traditional. That's Ladi Rinpoche was a great. He was the abbot of Ganden Shartse Monastery, I think it is. So I mean, he was a great scholar. But so he suggests. I mean, his view is that they are simultaneous, and that they're in this. That they're, like I was describing it, they arise in the same instant in relation to the same object of awareness, is I guess is what he's saying. So he said blue, but it could. My example was ice cream, right? And so that they're all sort of the way it actually, and this is part of what he's getting at, though, is that these are. It's not like actually. I'll say a couple of points. One is he's suggesting, right, that they all arise in the aspect of and in relation to that same object in that moment, that object of mental consciousness. But another is like. It's actually quite interesting, isn't it? Like, I think what you guys are getting at, which is also, is that, and maybe this is an important point, is I think that what's being gotten at here, like discernment and feeling, are very basic, very simple. They're not, and I think, actually I want to kind of differentiate something, right? That's what he's getting at, that they're there in the moment, right? So what he's getting at is like, and that's why I use, actually, to be honest, that was why I used the example of my niece, is she's like a kid, so it's like very spontaneous. But what I guess what I'm getting at is this, is I think what we have to differentiate for a moment is like, so like that as soon as the I consciousness sees it, it's discriminating, it's feeling, and then what can happen after, which I think is what you're getting at, Jeff, is that we can then conceptualize, we can sort of then say, ice cream is the best thing in the world. I love ice cream more than any other food. Ice cream is my favorite food and my favorite type of it. But that actually is, what's there to say, right? That's subsequent. As though those cognitions would be subsequent. But this is something more basic than that, that's happening in each moment, and that's happening in the first moment. And even as those subsequent moments are happening, there's continuing to be discrimination and feeling in each of those moments. But what Ladi Rinpoche is saying, and what this discernment is, and it's great to think about, is that it's really there in each moment, and you can't, and actually what's interesting also is you can't turn it off. Feeling, you can, like what he's getting, if you study this Buddhist psychology thing, you can stop the cognitive stuff, right? You could say, okay, I'm going to stop thinking about ice cream. Maybe you can do it, maybe you can't, but you could try at least, and sometimes you'll do it, or whatever the thing would be. Whereas feeling is always going to be there. You could sort of stop a positive feeling, and because you get a neutral feeling, but you're always going to have a feeling in each moment. And if it were sequential, the problem would be, then there'd be a moment where there was no feeling, right? You'd have a bare perception of ice cream with no feeling, and then you would give rise to feeling. But as you'd be giving rise to feeling, there'd be another, actually you're still aware of, if the I consciousness is still aware of ice cream, what he's getting at is each moment has a quality of feeling. So
feeling is part of the
way of apprehending.
Yes, I mean, it's part of it.
Yep.
Karmically, it's part of it.
So the five skandhas are really just the first 5 of the group of mental factors. Is that a correct way to look at it?
No, they're not. Because, like, for example, like form is not a mental factor. So that's one example, right? Like form is not a mental factor. It's matter, right? So it's not a factor of mind. It's an object.
Would it be considered a mental factor in a mind-only school?
No, they would say form doesn't. They wouldn't say it's a mental factor. They would say form doesn't exist separate from mind, as a separate entity from mind, but they wouldn't, even the mind only school wouldn't say form is a mental factor. They would say it's not separate from the mind, but they wouldn't say it's a mental factor.
Okay.
Lauren, you mentioned, you know, that like you can never kind of turn it off, like feeling is always there, whether it's, even if it's neutral and it feels like there's no feeling, there's still that feeling of neutral.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the kind of thing that is no longer true once you're a Buddha? Like then you don't have the positive and negative because you don't have any more karma?
Good question. Like what they different, actually, well, at one point I'll say is, I mean, again, different Buddhist schools would give different, slightly different answers to that question, I think. But of them, the answer I'll give, I guess, the one that I think is that, let's see this right. One way of thinking about it that's taught in some sutras and also in the tantras, so I think I'll use that one, is that for a Buddha, the five aggregates, that the Buddha does, if you think of the five aggregates as samsara, then the Buddha doesn't have five aggregates, of course, in the sense that he or she doesn't have a samsaric being. But in the, so in some sutras and in the tantras, what they talk about is that the five aggregates for a Buddha are transformed into the five Tathagatas and the five wisdoms. So in that sense, like feeling would become feeling would be related to or transmuted into, sometimes they call it the wisdom of equality. So that, like for a Buddha, they don't have, I say it is fair to say that the Buddha doesn't have an ordinary sense of feeling as we do. That the Buddha has that the Buddha's, what's the word, aggregate of feeling, I guess you could say, is transmuted into something else that's a kind of wisdom. That's one way of putting it. So you're right, though, that the Buddha would not have feeling in the sense that samsaric beings do, because the Buddha wouldn't feel pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral.
Okay, and then can I ask one more? I'm sorry to
Sure.
like belabor this conversation.
No,
but so then I was starting to think about kind of Jeff's point and this conversation we were having about sequential versus simultaneous. And of course, these things kind of happen moment to moment all the time. So I started to think about like them in the context of impermanence and how they would then change also from moment to moment. But I don't really know how to phrase this, but I started thinking about the rope and snake kind of thing, where it's like you're actually apprehending, essentially in form at least, the same object, but then your kind of feeling and discrimination will change like from moment to moment. When you sort of realize that it's not a snake and it's a rope, those kinds of, that perception will change. But I'm wondering, like, would that be considered like a different object of awareness because you have realized now that it's not a snake, it's a rope? Or would it be considered like the same object of awareness and it's just the mental factors around it that are changing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I guess because I think what you're getting is a few things. One is, what I call discrimination or discernment. One point is it's not always correct, right? Like for an ordinary person, for a Buddha, a Buddha's discernment is always a correct discernment. But for an ordinary person, our discernment is often wrong, is one point you're getting at. And yeah, you really do have to think about it actually as momentary, don't you? In order to understand, and this is why I think this is why I'm, it's worth taking the time to think about the five aggregates, which again, obviously, is really wonderful to do, and which we often don't do, is that, so that they're momentary implies, as you're saying, impermanence, right? And it's quite interesting, isn't it? Like, is the rope, say that your example of a rope, somebody saw a rope, thought it was a snake, and right, like, so in the first instant, right, the visual consciousness perceives shape, right? Because actual visual consciousness perceives shape and color, right? And then, as you were saying, so that's what do you call it? The uncommon empowering condition for that moment of awareness is visual consciousness perceiving shape and color. And then right, in one instant, right, that person might have discerned that or discriminate that as a snake, which would be accompanied in that moment by an unpleasant feeling, right? And then in the next moment, maybe they jump and they move, or you know, in the midair, they're still looking, and then their visual consciousness sort of is still perceiving shape and color, right? But it's a different moment of shape and color, you know, because now you're in the next moment. And then there can be a subsequent discernment of it's a rope, right? So on the one, like, it's an interesting point, right? In one way, so first of all, that they're sequential, that each moment is separate, that each moment there is accompanied by discrimination and feeling is true, right? The first one would be an unpleasant feeling. Maybe when they realize the rope, they might have a pleasant feeling of relief. But in terms of your question of the same or different, right? That's an interesting question just in general, right? Because in other words, if you think about it, if you sort of contemplate it, are any two moments, like if you think of, you know, even just think of looking at a cup, right? Like if I look at I'm looking at my cup. It's a cup with Shakespearean insults on it. I like that cup. Insults from Shakespeare. But anyway, so if I look at that cup, right, there I'm not having one discrimination and then contradicted, but are any two moments of awareness of the cup, because you said, are they the same or are they different, right? And that's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, I'm just sort of contemplating, because if I say they're the same, well, they're different moments, right?
It's actually a phenomenal point you make.
Yeah, but if I say they're inherently different, well, it's the same, you know, like they're both of awareness of a cup. So you can't say that they're unrelated in the sense of inherently different. They're different moments. But yeah, so that'd be a harder question. I mean,
are the rope and the snake the same basis?
The rope and the.
So
See
there's
what you mean.
So there's the.
I'm not sure what you mean.
There's the awareness of the snake. The discrimination is a snake. Then there is awareness of a rope, discrimination of a rope. The basis hasn't changed, correct?
You mean like in this sense, you mean like I guess the reason why, I'll be honest, the reason why I'm hesitating is like, it's really interesting if you get into the thinking about the five aggregates in this way, right? Because in a sense, like if we're using Lottie Rinpoche's thing, right? Like, is the basis shape and color? Is that what you mean by basis? Or do you mean, like, or do you mean something outside yourself? That's what I'm sort of contemplating when you say basis, is because the I conscious, he's talking about in terms of awareness, there's a moment where he calls it the uncommon empowering condition as an I conscious perceiving shape and color, right? So when you say basis, do you mean an I consciousness perceiving shape and color, or do you mean an external object?
The latter. I mean, there's a conventional reality of a rope, and there is not a conventional reality of a snake. We're talking about the same moment of little picture frame, right? So the same moment there is discerned in two different ways, but the basis is the same. I'm surmising.
Don't you talk about a basis, like when you talk about, like in the Lamrim, the object to be negated? Isn't there a whole thing about how there's like the basis of the object to be negated? Maybe I'm hallucinating, but maybe that's what Jeff means?
No, I just mean the object itself. We're talking about these two different moments of perception and feeling. And I'm just saying the basis is the same.
Yeah, no, I think that's okay.
There is a conventional.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, if we just, I mean, I was sort of pausing and sort of giving it too complicated. If you think of it from mind-only perspective versus Majjhima, but on a very simplistic level, I think we'd say the basis is the same. Yeah, that's fair.
And to me, I think
After learning that example, the snake, I have to discern that it's a snake and not a rope for me to be fearful of it. So it may be, so is the word, I'm thinking though, is the word more like, is it happening instantaneously, but maybe not simultaneously and happening independent of each other? Like, can I think of feeling and discrimination as there's dependent origination even in those two concepts, right? That it's kind of, when I discriminate the feeling, it can be independent of the feeling and vice versa. Is that what you mean by simultaneous?
Actually, I'll kind of,
yeah.
Oh, sorry, or maybe you go ahead if you want, or else.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to clarify, because the snake for me is like, obviously I have to discriminate first, wrongly or rightly, that it's a snake before I could be fearful of it. But I understand that the moment to moment, but even moment to moment is sequential for me. It's just that in this world that we have, we can now discern the instantaneous microsecond, right? Whereas like, you know, in the time of Buddha, maybe the word simultaneous, there's no such thing as nanosecond, but it may be kind of just word, a kind of like a, you know, I'm just like thinking aloud in that sense.
But isn't it possible, like I'm thinking about how you say that you have to discern that it's a snake first. I mean, hasn't it happened? It's happened to me, certainly, that I see something and I like have no idea what it is, but I'm like, oh, what is that? You know, like, and so I think like sometimes the feeling actually comes up before you have the chance to discriminate necessarily what it is. You see an object, you see a form, and you see a color, and I don't know if it's necessarily that you put the concept snake onto the object. You just see a thing, and the feeling arises. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but doesn't the seeing the thing that cause your fear, isn't it the cause, or isn't the feeling dependent on the seeing the thing, whatever you see?
Not if they're simultaneous, it's not.
But I don't know how they could be. I can't grasp that.
In the case of fearing and not seeing it, but the seeing, it cannot, it's not just seeing, it's you could also feel, and the feeling is still a discernment, like you're kind of just that. So it doesn't have to just be seeing, it can also be hearing, or like kind of like you're feeling, like if you're in the dark. That in itself, you have a discernment against those levels of what you're kind of sensing before you have to have a feeling, even though it seems to be happening like instantaneously. I'm thinking that discernment has to happen first, but very like microseconds, like, and happening a lot, like right, going back and forth.
I'll make a comment in a minute. I want to let Alex, who's kept raising his hand, so I just want to give him a chance to say something too.
Yeah, I had a question a few moments ago when this topic of feeling came up, where I think you were talking about it in the context of the 5 skandhas, the 5 aggregates. But I think that term feeling, or I think there's a Sanskrit or Pali word, Vedana.
Yeah, Vedana, that's it.
Feeling. It can also be understood to be one of the links of dependent arising, feeling,
yeah,
feeling, and all of that. And I think that it's useful to think in a practical sense, like going back to the kind of topics you were talking about in the meditation before we began teaching today, that kind of the selfish motivation giving rise to problems. And I think that if we kind of become aware of these qualities of feelings which are pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, that if we're able to sit and just observe that, it could also be, I think, understood to be this topic of feeling is also presented in the context of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, studied in the Sutra, where the usefulness of it as far as to reduce confusion in the mind is that you try to develop the capacity to just observe pleasant and unpleasant feelings without acting on them, without going to the next link in the chain of causation. And so I think that the purpose, to me, my understanding, which I think is practical or useful, is just to be able to notice that quality arising in the mind in whatever context it is. The same stimulus may at sometimes be, the feeling that arises may be pleasant or it may be unpleasant at different times. So the point, I think, is to, for me, which is to be practical, is that to when you notice that those different feelings, but you have the capacity to just not act, in a reactive way, but you can pause a moment and just be aware of that before you decide what to do. So I just wanted to share that, but I think that we're kind of, it feels like there's some confusion, but to me that it's kind of a topic or teaching that belongs in a different, it's studied in a different way. I don't know.
And I'll just make a couple of general comments now. Like, one is, I think just the fact that, like, again, because I mean, many of you have heard, the 5 skandhas, the 5 aggregates mentioned, and just the fact that folks are kind of wondering these things and thinking and asking questions and sort of contemplating, how does that work? That's great. Like, that's the goal. I mean, that was my goal for today, in a way, is for people to think about this and start to wonder and start to go, wow, I heard this teaching, but how does that really work? And my own experience, right? And if I get upset, how are the 5 aggregates? How is feeling? How is discrimination? How are these things functioning? So just the fact that you guys are asking these questions, is part of, it's part of what if we're going to make use of the teaching of the 5 aggregates, that's part of what one would do. So it's great that you're asking questions and thinking about it, and I hope you keep thinking about it, is one point. And then a couple of other just general points. One is, Alex, I agree with a lot of what you said, and that was, I think, good points. And then I want to say a couple other things, though, too. Like, one is, we have to be careful to differentiate something. That fear, right, is actually a different, fear would not be, fear is not the same as feeling. In other words, that's what I was saying earlier about English. If I say, because I remember at the very beginning when I talked about the aggregate of feeling, I said there's a danger in the English word, because we say, I feel angry, I feel afraid, I feel sad, I feel happy, whatever, all these different things like that. I feel depressed, I feel joyful, but Vedana, as that word, right, or feeling in this context, in Buddhist psychology, is much more basic than that. Or so feeling would accompany perception, but those other things, like, let's say fear or anger or attachment, that's a different mental factor. That can also accompany a mind in any given moment, but that's not the same mental factor as feeling, is one point. Feeling is the basic feeling of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, right? And I guess one thing that's important is that, just to point out also, because if you start to observe your own experience, I just wanted to mention this so that you can check and see for yourself. Also, you have to check in your own internal introspection for yourself, then compare these teachings to your own introspection and see. But I'll say a few things. One is, it's actually interesting. I was just reading something the other day that was pointing this out, that reminded me, like, in Buddhism, actually Lama Tsongkhapa says something interesting. He says, what's a moment? At one point in a commentary, he says, what does it mean, a moment? And then he says, there are different definitions of the word moment, which I thought was funny. And he says, he says some Abhidharma texts say a moment is 1/365th of a finger snap. And then he says other Abhidharma texts say it's 1/60-somethingth of a finger snap. Others say it's the time when a task is completed, or something like that, like the moment of a completion. And so he says, and then he's saying they're all correct point. There are all ways you can talk about a moment. So a moment is a very brief period, is what he's partly saying. And then another point I just want to point out, because I think this is important practically if you're observing your own, is there are, because you guys are getting at really important points, and I want to make it clear just so that it doesn't you don't get confused, is that of course things happen, there are things that are happening sequentially, right? And so I want to leave the example of the snake, because I think that one's specific, that one we use about emptiness, but I'll use a simpler example. Like, if I, actually, because I guess what I want to say is this, is like, well, I'm going to give one a fear. Like, if I see, I'm going to give a very simplistic example for a second. If I were out, if tomorrow, if I were out at a store, right, and I turned a corner and saw a man in front of me not wearing a mask, and he coughed in my direction, right? In that instant, right, the main mind would be perceiving, let's say, I'll use the example of visual conscious, right? So I'm seeing that he's not wearing a mask and that he's coughing in my direction. Simultaneous with that would be an unpleasant feeling for me, for sure. And there would be, and I would discern in that very instant, human coughing, right? That would all be simultaneous. Then though, and this is getting at Cynthia's point, there would then be a sequential process, right? I would continue for a few moments. If you think of a moment as a very brief time, right? Then there might be a moment of fear after that, but the fear would come later, right? But the fear, now, like at first I would just feel unpleasant, and there would be discernment, person, coughing, that would all be in one instant, right? And actually, if you check and introspect, you would then watch, right? If you look back, you would see then you'd maybe get afraid, right? And fear would still be, now the fear, actually it's an interesting point. The fear might be in relation to the mind, actually, right? Like the first was a visual consciousness, perceiving person, coughing, and there's a moment of unpleasant and discernment, person. Then actually the next moment, I might have a mental conscious thinking that we would be imagining now. It's not a visual conscious. They'll be imagining thousands or millions of particles of coronavirus shooting at me, right? And in relation to that mental consciousness, I might feel fear, which would also be unpleasant, right? In terms of feeling, there would still be an unpleasant feeling. And then that would be accompanied by a different mental factor in that same instant, which is fear, right? And the discernment would be cough coronavirus, something like that. Imagine, and it would be a mental image of coronavirus that would accompany that main object of that moment. And then I might, a few moments later, look back at the guy, right? And now still there will be an unpleasant feeling, right? Now again, I'm discerning person, right? And there would still be an unpleasant feeling. Discernment would be person, feeling would be unpleasant. And then there might be a mental factor of anger, for example, right? Like, so now it's no longer fear, right? The fear, and those are sequential. So like the first moment might be unpleasant sensation. The second moment, I might feel fear. The third moment, I may feel anger. I'm just giving an example here, right? Those are different moments, and they are sequential. But you see what I'm getting at? Each of them would have a feeling component. The first would be just unpleasant. The second would be unpleasant and would be accompanied by fear. And then the third might be unpleasant and accompanied by anger. But those are each separate moments that each have their own discernment or discrimination, and each have their own feeling. That's just getting back to Cynthia's. Does that make sense there? So like there are sequential things that happen for sure, and they do happen dependent upon the previous moment, but each of them is accompanied by feeling and discernment. each of those moments. But again, I want to just encourage, think about this and look at it. This would be a great exercise to do this week even, is like to notice your own experience, you know, as you eat lunch, or as you walk down the street, or as you turn on the TV, or as you go to meditate, whatever, is to stop and go, what am I feeling? What am I just, but feeling here is not an emotion. Feeling here is that most basic component of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And all of our emotions are accompanied by the mental. There's a sound going. I don't know what that is, but each moment of emotion is accompanied by feeling. But emotion is not the same as feeling, right? If I'm feeling sad or happy or angry or afraid, that's a different mental factor. But each of those mental factors is always accompanied by feeling. That's all. I just want to mention.
Lauren.
Yep.
I'm like you. I cannot quote books or sources, but I feel like I've read some neuroscience studies that have pretty much captured this in brain waves, where there's the initial, like, people think they're making these thoughtful decisions, but actually the decision was made like instantly before there's real mental cognition. It's these like immediate aggregates you're talking about with the discrimination and feeling.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like Western science on how these things function are very, you know, and that's where, like, you know, a lot of times, I mean, there are actual talks that are recorded, or, you know, you can read where the Dalai Lama met with neuroscientists, and part of that is because these are very similar, and neuroscience is pretty consistent. These points it's consistent with. You know, and that cognition does, and that's what we're getting at. There is subsequent cognition, but in the moment, these things are happening, and that they're, anyway, yeah. I mean, I don't want to get into too much detail, but that's, I agree with what you said.
To me, they're what kind of makes it so hard to change our behavior, because it's like, it's happening before we've even really got a handle on it.
Yeah, and that's where I have a question, because I had a dream, and it was somebody breaking in or something, and that it came into a visceral fear thing. And then I woke up from it, and I thought, what am I going to do with this? Because I know that you can transform. If you catch it in the moment, you can transform it. And that's what it's all about for me. How can you, because you can transform a lot of things, but this is so immediately. And there is, I know there is a book about how you can transform your dreams, but I haven't gotten there yet. But I acknowledged this, and I said that this must be my karma, and that was about it, you know, and just let it subside in my body. But then for the rest, I don't know what to do with it yet. Is that enough for now?
Yeah, I think so, isn't it? Like, or is it, actually, if I thought of, you know, actually, like, honestly, what I thought about was, I thought of Rinpa Rinpoche, and I thought, I don't know what Rinpa Rinpoche would say, of course, but what I imagined he would say was something like, how wonderful, you purified, you know, like, you know, you got to do it in a dream. You didn't even have to, you know, like, and you got to do it in a dream, which is a good way to purify, actually, you know, because it's a negative, right? That unpleasant feeling in your body is a karmic result, and you got to do it in a dream, which is better than, you know, so they sometimes say that's a result of good practice, right? That you purify your karma in a dream rather than having to have the...
Oh, that's so good to hear. That's so good to hear, Lauren, because I've done so many things in my dreams.
Yeah, so maybe, I think that's what they say, actually. There are teachings like that, where they say, actually, if you do a good job on your Vajrasattva or other purification practices, then, you know, then instead of having to go through some bad lifetime or bad years of experience, you have a bad dream and it purifies the karma. So in your case, it's probably something like that, is what I imagine.
Thank you so much.
I think that's probably true. actually, I want to, yeah, we still have time. Good. I want to use this now to go on to the next, actually the fourth skanda, because I think it's important, actually. It's related to what we're talking about. And it's very much, because actually the, you know, so we covered form, feeling, and discrimination, right? And feeling and discrimination are omnipresent mental factors. When I said that, omnipresent means they accompany each moment. We went into a lot of detail about they're simultaneous, but the point is that you can't turn them off, right? Then the next mental factor, though, is called, I think it's very interesting. In the Tibetan tradition, usually they call it compositional factors. That's usually the translation in English. Sometimes they call it formations. But in some sutras, if you look, like in the original sutras, sometimes it's called that, but sometimes it's called volition. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. That sometimes this one is called volition, which is just one particular mental factor. Volition is a mental factor. But sometimes it's called compositional factors. And so I want to first cover compositional factors, then go to volition. Compositional factors, the way they define it is, they say, what are compositional factors? And they say, all the mental factors other than feeling or discrimination, right? And the entities that do not accompany consciousness, and various entities that do not accompany consciousness. And so in one way, you could say compositional factors is like a catch-all. It's all the mental factors not included under discernment or feeling, and it's not consciousness. You know, consciousness is the fifth of them, right? So if something is not form, and it's not consciousness, and it's not feeling, and it's not discrimination, then it's compositional factors, right? And so compositional factors would include, you know, all the other mental factors: fear and faith, anger, desire, compassion, love, regret, sleep. You know, all these different other mental factors would be included under compositional factors. And then another thing, which I said, things not accompanying, things that are not mental factors. So what that means is, like, there are things that existent phenomena that are part of your being that are not form and also not consciousness and not feeling. And those would be things like your name, your gender, your roles, you know, like the fact that you're, you know, you have a certain job, like, or a title. The fact that, you know, those are things that are part of your being, but they're not mental factors, right? They're not mental factors that accompany a given moment of consciousness, and they're not parts of your body, right? Like they're, like your name is not part of your body, right? It's your name. So that would be an example of a part of compositional factors: syllables, nationality, race, gender, you know, all these other sort of things that we can say they exist, you know, conventionally, right? They're existent phenomena. So they would come under compositional factors. But then in the sutras, the Buddha calls it, sometimes the Buddha just calls this fourth one volition. And one of the commentaries said, you know, volition is the most important of these. And in a sense, all the others are relevant in the context largely of volition. And so I wanted to get, so in terms of compositional factors, the most important of them is volition. And volition actually is what we started with today, right? What's your motivation? And this is getting at something you guys were starting to raise, right? Because I'm going to point out something. You can't, actually, you know, like your past karma determines your feelings, right? So you can't force yourself to feel pleasant when you feel unpleasant. And your past karma, I'm sorry, and then discernment, you can't turn it off, right? So you're going to discern things. You know, and you're going to discern, like, oh, that's a person. Oh, that's a table. Oh, that's a whatever. You know, even if you discern things, I was thinking about, in discernment, actually, I laughed yesterday. I was thinking about it. I was thinking, there was some of you may have read it. There was a famous book years ago by Oliver Sacks. He's passed away now, famous neurologist, I guess he was, called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, right? There was a guy who had an unusual neurological condition where when he would see his wife, he thought a hat was there. So his discernment was incredibly off because of a neurological condition, but he still was discerning, right? He was just discerning in a totally incorrect, you know, wildly incorrect way. which we all can do, but we can't turn that off. But volition is something we can control, right? Volition means intention. It means motivation. And so I just wanted to make sure that today we at least, go into this one a little bit, because, and why is that important? So first of all, volition is the thing that determines your karma. It's your motivation, it's your intention, it's your volition that determines if a karmic action is good or bad. And volition also, this is taught in the various Lamrim texts and then Abhidharma and so on, is also, this is an important point, is that volition is also different than the mental afflictions. So volition is intentional, right? And my point is like, and the reason why I'm mentioning that volition is where we can actually do something. You can set your motivation, you can work, and even if you have a mental affliction, right? Like let's say, for example, in my example earlier that I gave, right? Where I gave the example of if I turned a corner and the guy wasn't wearing a mask and coughed right at, like was 2 feet away and coughed in my direction, right? I can't control that I discern person, and I can't discern that I have an unpleasant feeling, right? That's a result of my karma. I can't, if then my mind immediately jumps to the image of whatever, particles of coronavirus, and I feel afraid, right? And I have an unpleasant feeling. I can't control that either in that moment. It's almost, that's a second instant, right? And even the third instant where I start to give rise to experience of anger, let's say that's a habit, right? And I start to give rise to anger. If it happens very quickly, for someone like me, I can't control that either, actually. But now I can control, what I can control is my volition, right? And that's where I can say, like, so in other words, so it'll be the next moment, right? I can say to myself, the many things, right? But one is I can say, now is the time to practice patience, right? And even if my mental factor, if I have let's say an emotional experience, afflictive emotion of anger, I can have the volition, the intention to practice patience in that moment, right? And then I can use different trainings, Lojong, for example, right? I can apply Lojong mind training techniques to work on patience. And if my volition in that moment, even if so it's an unpleasant experience, right? But if in the moment, my volition, my intention is, I want to practice patience. I want to get better at patience. That's positive. I'm creating positive karma in that moment. Does that make sense? Because my volition is, I want to practice a virtuous practice of patience. If I could even think, I want to practice patience with awareness of bodhicitta, then I'm practicing the perfection of patience, right? And with awareness of emptiness, that the person who's coughed and I and the action of coughing and the action of practicing patience are all empty of inherent existence, then I'm practicing the perfection of patience, right? And it'll be cause of enlightenment. And so my point is, volition is, on the one hand, is where we can affect our own process. So it's hugely important. And volition is where all our happiness and unhappiness come from, actually. Our intentions, our volitional states. And so, so this fourth mental factor, you can see, I just want to point this out because I think it's important if we're covering the five aggregates. You can see for sure why the Buddha mentioned, first of all, that since the five aggregates are supposed to be all encompassing, we call them compositional factors because they include all those different factors, right, that I mentioned. All the other mental factors and all the, aspects of our being that are not associated with a mental factor, like your name, your nationality, and so on, those things. But the most important one is volition of all these mental factors. So of the fourth aggregate, the most important is volition, is intention, is motivation, right? Because it's the factor that it's actually, volition is is the main factor in karma, in karmic cause and effect. It's also and it's also what we can influence. We can change our motivation over time. We can train ourselves. We can work at our motivation. We can, and in any given instant, we can't control if we're going to have pleasant or unpleasant experiences. what we can do is we can, we can have an intention, right? We can set an intention, and we can what's the word? We can do that through effort, because this one involves effort. And actually, I'll point out something else. Volition is also, right, is, if you think about the path to enlightenment, right, it's volition, isn't it? Like, in other words, it starts with volition, right? Or renunciation, right? The wish, in other words, the intention to achieve enlightenment, to escape samsaric suffering. Or bodhicitta, right? The intention to become enlightened and a Buddha for the welfare of all sentient beings. Those are intentions, volitions. And so, anyway, that one, volition, is incredibly important. And then, so this, you get the idea. This aggregate includes, as a heap, it's a bunch of things. And all those other ones are important to the extent that they are connected to volition. And then I'll just go to the last of the 5 aggregates. So, and then I'll take questions again. So you got the first 4, right? Form, feeling, or Vedana, right? And feeling not being emotional, but being pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Discernment or discrimination. Compositional factors, the most important of which is volition. And then the last of the 5 aggregates is consciousness. And so consciousness is sometimes it's defined as awareness of an object, or sometimes it's defined as that which is clear and knowing. Right? So knowing means aware, and clear means clear in this context means not physical, right? So it's not something. It's sort of that it can take on the aspect. So it's not physical, and it can take on the aspect of whatever appears to it. But it's also important to include aware or knowing, right? Because like a mirror is clear, right? It can take on the aspect of whatever appears in front of it, but it's not an awareness, right? So, so the definition of consciousness is that which is clear in the sense that it can take on the aspect, but it's also what's the word? An awareness, or a knower. And actually, for consciousness, also there are 6 consciousnesses. The main one is mental consciousness, but there's also there's visual consciousness, auditory consciousness, olfactory consciousness, taste consciousness, and tactile consciousness. But the most important is mental consciousness. And consciousness, also going back to what I was saying earlier, consciousness, the aggregate of consciousness, is the main mind I was talking about, right? That main mind that's aware, that has the accompanying mental factors. So that main awareness is the aggregate of consciousness. And then the mental factors that surround it or accompany it are included under either feeling or discrimination, or under the bunch that are compositional factors. And so this this list of the 5 aggregates was important. A few things are important, right? One is they're said to include all conditioned phenomena. All conditioned phenomena are said to be included. It can be included under the 5 aggregates. And also, though, what's really important is that the 5 aggregates are what's the word? Are the factors that make up your being. Your being, I'll call it. A sentient being. And something else also, like, even if you just start, if you start to contemplate the 5 aggregates as the factors that make up your being, right? If you start to notice them, right? Okay, that's form, that's feeling, that's discrimination, like we were talking about, that's volition, that's, those are the other mental afflictions, right? The mental afflictions are included under compositional factors. So anger and hatred and craving and grasping and pride and, all those other ones like that. Actually, I want to suggest, I want to say a few things while we still have a moment. Like one is, I want to suggest I'm going to start now suggesting each session, like you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but if you're willing, I want to suggest like each session now, because we're getting really into the heart of the sutra, the heart of the Hut Sutra. I want to suggesting like homework. And it's not like a written homework or something like that, but it's an awareness. But what I want to suggest for this week actually is just to start to think about yourself in the relation to the five aggregates, like, and to notice them, right? So to notice your volition, to notice your discernment, to notice feeling, to notice mental afflictions, to notice consciousness, right? Awareness, which we actually, funny one is like consciousness which means moment to moment awareness is always there for sure, right? And yet, if you check, you often don't, many of us never once notice that mental factor. If you practice Mahamudra or Dzogchen, then you do, I think, or something like that. But if you don't, then you may never even notice your own awareness, right? So to look at awareness too, to look into the nature of awareness. And to start to notice those heaps. And that one is good to do because otherwise this is just a list of things, right? If you don't introspect and notice them in your own experience, then they're really not relevant, actually, are they? Like, it's just some list the Buddha gave, and whatever, and who cares? Like, if you don't relate it to, if you don't introspect, and, this is an aspect of mindfulness, as Alex was pointing out. Alex was pointing out the four foundations of mindfulness, some of which are, directly related to this. But anyway, some of them are specifically listed in the four, but part of the practice of Buddhism is to be aware of this process of the five aggregates, which are a process, right? And you'll start to notice a few things. One is momentariness, right? That the five aggregates are momentary phenomena, right? None of them are stable, right? Awareness is momentary, right? You're aware of this, you're aware of that. Each moment is awareness. Feeling is momentary. Discernment is momentary. Even our volition is momentary, right? Our afflictive emotions are always, they exist moment by moment. So you'll start to notice impermanence. And then one other thing, if you decide you're willing to do this homework assignment of just noticing the five aggregates in your own experience, is then like to just even begin to ask yourself, this is what I guess we'll end up getting into next week, is there a you that's separate from the five aggregates, that owns them, right? The mind. Are they yours? If they're your five aggregates, then is there a you separate from them? Or are you the five aggregates? Are you all of them? Or are you one of them? Are you findable in there somehow? So do you exist? Just to start asking yourself, well, if this is my discrimination and this is my feeling in this moment, right? Like, I saw a news story and I got upset, right? So there's an awareness that saw words, right? There's a feeling, unpleasant, whatever. There's a mental affliction, whatever it was that was upset. There's the feeling of unpleasant. There's a discernment of words and so on. There's consciousness. There is the I, right, that was looking, and so you start to go, who's the person, right? Who is that person, the I, the self, and I'm just suggesting this as an inquiry, does that make sense? To start asking yourself that and start noticing your own experience, so where's that person? How does that person exist in relation to those five areas? And again, and just start to notice, does it feel like it? The Dalai Lama points out, he says sometimes, and all Buddhist teachers do it at different points, but sometimes it'll seem like there's a self who's separate. So you might say, like I said, like if you say my, right? I said that earlier. Like if my experience is my back hurts, it doesn't right now, but if it did, right? If my back hurts, they say that, right? So then it seems like there's an I who's separate from my back, right? So where's that I? Who is that I that's separate from my back? Is it own the back? Or is the I the consciousness? Is myself my consciousness, and somehow that's my back? And how is it my back? You know, something like that. And then, or is it that I am my body? I hurt. I'm in pain, right? And then who's the I that is the body? The body has a whole bunch of parts. Is the I, where is it? And for now, that's enough. Does that make sense? Just to like start inquiring, because that's what we're going to really sort of explore next time as we get into emptiness. I thought we started to say, but it was enough. It was good that I think it's great that you guys ask all these questions about, because that's the process. Does that make sense? If you start checking, then you should ask yourself, like it should be like, you know, and even if you say, well, I didn't think I had a feeling in that moment. You know, Buddhism says you're supposed to have feeling each moment. Was that a neutral feeling, or did I not feel anything? You know, and I've noticed that oftentimes where people say, I don't feel anything. But actually, like if you check, right, a neutral feeling is a feeling. Does that make sense? And so, but check and see if you agree with that or not, if that fits your experience. Because that's the real practice. Does that make sense? Is relating this to your moment-to-moment experience. Anyway, so that's that. Any other questions, though, in the last couple minutes? Does the assignment make sense and so on? Sarah, you have a question?
Yeah. So I've been starting to think about these five, and it seems like, so this is like a correct me if I'm wrong sort of assessment, but it seems like you can sort of split the aggregates into two, which is like form and mind. And then mind you can split into like the main mind, or I guess what you call consciousness, and then the mental factors. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, which it seems like it is, why do you think, is it just their importance, the reason that they, instead of just kind of clumping it as two or potentially three, that they pull out specifically sort of like feeling and discrimination as specific mental factors, rather than just like clumping them in with like all of the mental factors, instead of like adding them into the compositional factors one? Like what is the purpose, you know, what maybe it's pedagogical, right, of pulling those two out?
I have a few comments on that. One is, I mean, oftentimes, like, you know, because we're doing an in-depth study of the Heart Sutra, I'm really going into detail now. But, you know, sometimes I've noticed myself when I'm being very imprecise, I'll sort of say like the body and the mind, you know, like search the body and the mind for the I or something like that. But so sometimes people do that. I've done that before in my own practice, for example. But if we're being precise, I'll say a few things. One is, under one point, I'll just make just a small detail. This is not a big deal, but one point is, under compositional factors, there are some factors of our being that are neither body nor mind. You know, which are, like I mentioned, like, so for example, like, or they're not mental factors, they're not consciousness, and they're not body. And that would be for an example of nationality, for example, or name, or even actually under that one also would be your impermanence, right? In other words, that's a truth that exists. It's an existent thing, impermanence, but it's not form, and it's not a mental factor, and it's not consciousness. You know, you say, you know, so like one of Sarah's qualities is she's impermanent, right? That is true, but it's not. So one point is technically there are some things about our being that are neither form nor consciousness nor mental factors. That's if we're being really precise, that's one thing. Because, you know, and that's, you know, if we're really doing an exhaustive search, for example, when we're looking for the sense of the referent for the self, you know, sometimes we may include those, right? Like, is my nationality, or is my impermanence, or is my name, or is my gender, or is my whatever, any of those things, are those the I? So one is that would leave. So one is what if we, I've done that where I'll say search the body and mind, but if I say that, I'm actually leaving certain factors out if we're really going to go do an exhaustive and detailed search. That's one point. But then in your other point, yeah, I do think my own view, and I think other people have said things like this, is that, you know, I was saying at the beginning, the Buddha could have, in theory, one steps back and says, well, the Buddha could have said, you know, could have listed, you know, other factors of our being as sort of, it could have had 7 aggregates, or could have had, you know, 4 aggregates, you know, and sort of left some of the others under, you know, under, like, he, you know, like you said, he could have listed, he could have done it in different ways, I think, if he had chosen to, obviously. And so I think your point is correct, what you said, which is, I think the only reasonable way to look at it is pedagogical, you know, that it was a teaching method. And that what the Buddha was doing in part in teaching the 5 aggregates in this way, and that's why I'm suggesting this homework, it was telling us where to look, telling us what to emphasize. Because these are the factors, you know, because part of what the Buddha was getting at, in a way, actually it's really interesting, isn't it? Let's see one thing, actually, if you think deeply about the 5 aggregates, right, in the way the Buddha taught them, and specifically that include these ones of feeling and discernment and then volition, you know, you'll see, first of all, as Alex mentioned earlier, you'll see how they connect to the 12 links of dependent origination if you study that. You'll see how they, actually you'll start to see how they connect to suffering, right? And to your experience of suffering, right? And to your, and you'll start to see how samsara works, because the 5 aggregate, you know, if you analyze, if you look at your experience in this particular way, you know, if you just say body and mind, it's actually quite vague. But if you start to look at these specific factors, you'll start to see how samsara functions, right? In your actual lived experience. Like, you know, you could study samsara, but if you contemplate your experience in connection to the 5 aggregates, that's one point, is you'll start, and actually if you contemplate the teaching on the 5 aggregates in detail in relation to yourself, you'll start to see, let's see, right? It'll help to develop renunciation. It'll help develop an awareness of impermanence, you know, of gross impermanence and then subtle impermanence, because it's there, you know, if you start to observe those things. You'll start to see how the mental factors and particularly the afflictive emotions and karma work, you know, because these all are also very much related to karma. You know, and then yeah, so I think that I don't know, you know, I think the main point is that, you know, and then also in terms of emptiness, right? That these are a particular tool where it's like an exhaustive enough list, you know, that you can really start to relate it to your own. So we say, right? Because I think actually, I think about it. If I just do Lama Tsongkhapa points out, for those of you who are in the middle length Lamrim, he kind of points this out, that, you know, when you I'm leaving that. The other one point is like what I already said, right? It's pedagogical in terms of understanding the nature of suffering, the nature of impermanence, the nature of samsara, and how samsara functions. But then also in terms of emptiness and meditation on emptiness, you know, if Lama Tsongkhapa pointed out, and as I was starting to say in the middle length Lamrim, if you just do a kind of very perfunctory analysis, it won't actually have an impact. You know, so if you just think, oh, is the self this one with the body and mind, or is it separate from the body and mind? And then you say, oh, it's not, it can't be one with them, and it can't be neither. And you sort of leave it at that. It won't have much impact, actually. You know, and so I think also these 5 areas of when you're going to do them in relation to the Heart Sutra and in relation to your own, to meditation on emptiness, is that they're, you know, and we'll get into other lists, but they're the most important list, actually. You know, we'll get into like the 6, you know, the senses and the sense powers and the sense fields, those are also there. But this list is the most important list given, you know, it's the first one given for contemplating emptiness, because it's a long enough list that you can really introspect and look and analyze as you search for your, you know, an inherently existent I. And so I think if you use this list also as your basis for searching for an inherently existent self, then it's long enough and it's detailed enough in terms of introspection and your own experience that it'll give you some visceral experience of emptiness. Whereas if you leave it too short a list, I think you don't have enough basis for really searching your experience. And if you do too long a list, I guess the problem would be that we get lost in the categories. So I think it's also a useful list. I think that, again, it's a teaching technique, which, you know, from one, of course, and actually everything the Buddha did was a teaching technique. So as if we say also it's a safe way to label it in a way, because the Buddha's emphasis was always on what will help beings awaken. So that's. Oh, we went over. So I guess we should do our dedication, and I guess we don't meet next for this class until. Is it? I guess do we have one on July 4th? I think we said I think I did schedule one, didn't I?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, Lord.
And then Dundrup, I saw posted there that July 11th, Geshe Sharab is teaching. He'll do an online class for the center, so we won't do this class because he'll be doing that week. But so we skip next week, and then we meet again on July 4th, and then we skip the 11th, but then we meet on the 18th and the 25th of July. So we'll have 3 in July.
Hey, Lauren.
Yeah.
Hey, the first class for Geshe Sharab is July 8th.
Oh, is it? Okay, great. And those are all on the website, right?
Yeah, it's on the website.
Okay, good. So yeah, everybody can look there. He's a great teacher. So you have a chance.
Yep.
But, all right, and we should do the dedication before we stop. The supreme jewel bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In the snowy mountain paradise, you the source of good and happiness, all-powerful Chinrazik Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. And thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren,
Lauren.
so much.
Thank you, Lauren.
No, good to see everybody.